August 6, 1945. A flash the commanders had been told was impossible lit the radio room. Farm Hall on a hill felt suddenly small and exposed. A voice on the line announced an event that contradicted every calculation the German High Command had made. Hidden recordings captured the moments that followed and later became evidence that changed how historians read the final months of the war. The reaction was immediate and not what the officers expected. This is the secret audio that forced generals to rethink not only technology, but the choices of their leaders. The room smelled of pipe smoke and cold metal. A single bulb hummed above a long table, scattered with maps and telegrams. Around the table sat General Krauss, Field Marshal Brandt, Colonel Becker, Captain Mertens, and Dr. Vogel, a physicist transferred from research. Outside the window, snow furred the landscape, and the radio emitted a distant static like ocean wind. Krauss tapped a pencil against a map and glanced at a folded transcript. He could see the tremble in Brandt's hand and hear the soft scrape of papers as men shifted. Tension tasted like coffee gone bitter. The men were a mix of military certainty and private fatigue. Each name meant different responsibilities and different blind spots. Lieutenant Fisher checked the receiver. Major Hartmann twirled a cigarette, and Admiral Loa listened in silence. The setting was a bunker of command, not a courtroom of certainty. A microphone hidden in a lamp recorded the next hour without the men knowing, and that recording would later expose a sequence of admissions no official report would capture. The radio operator cleared his throat and spoke into the set. Colonel Becker said, "I have the report." Captain Mertens stood. General Krauss asked, "What is the source?" Dr. Vogel leaned forward and repeated the line aloud as if tasting it. "A test explosion in New Mexico, United States." Brandt laughed briefly, then stopped. Lieutenant Fisher whispered, "This cannot be." Major Hartmann asked for frequencies and distance. Admiral Loa said, "Did they say atomic?" Becker answered, "The phrasing suggests a new weapon." Mertens scoffed, "That is folklore, Allied propaganda." Vogel said, "We must assume it is real until proven otherwise." The room shifted between disbelief and the methodical urge to calculate. Voices rose and fell like a ship on an anxious sea. The scrape of chairs, the clink of a cup, and the far-off thunder of boots in the corridor formed a background score to arguments that would soon become confessions. This dialogue of professional men trying to make sense of impossible news is the heart of the recording. After the initial disbelief, the men began to work through the numbers aloud. Krauss said, "If the blast radius is as reported, then the yield could be equivalent to tens of thousands of tons of TNT. Brandt countered, "That would require resources we do not have in scale." Becker replied, "Their industrial base is larger, do the math." Vogel explained, "The critical mass calculation is not a single line, it is an engineering challenge, and raw materials matter." Mertens asked where would they get the enriched material. Fisher suggested they might have captured supply lines from colonies. Hartmann argued, even so, scaling enrichment to bomb level takes factories. Loa said perhaps they had a different route. Each sentence was accompanied by the scratch of pens and the quiet tap of a cigarette ash falling into a tray. The men smelled oil on their uniforms and heard the metallic chirp of the receiver as if the radio itself sought confirmation. The exchanges numbered 7 in that scene, and each turn revealed not arrogance, but the constraint of absence, full of questions about resource, industrial capacity. Then accusations began, and voices hardened. Mertens said, "You mean our priorities were wrong?" Brandt shot back, "We followed orders and strategic choices made in Berlin." Becker accused, "The Führer and his ministers diverted materials to prestige projects." Vogel pleaded, "The scientists were kept isolated and underfunded." Krauss said, "We were deceived by projections that favored cannon over fuel." Fisher whispered, "It was paranoia that fractured cooperation." Hartmann said, "There is responsibility at the top and on the factory floor." The room cooled as blame moved from technical to political. Men who had exchanged numbers and formulas now traded guilt. The air felt heavier, the cigarette smoke filmy in the light, the taste of metallic regret on their tongues. A junior officer called Schultz entered with an additional dispatch, and the rustle of paper punctuated the scene. Secondary characters like Schultz, Lieutenant Neumann, Professor Adler, and Nurse Bergstrom appeared in the margins, signing statements, consulting charts, delivering coffee, and recording timestamps. Their actions anchored the scene in human detail and kept the narrative from becoming abstract. A technical analysis followed as the officers tried to explain how the Allied weapon could exist where German plans had not delivered. Vogel spoke in plain terms. The key is enrichment scale and resource prioritization. Imagine trying to filter sand with a sieve meant for pebbles. It is not about a single genius. It is about mass production. He described centrifuge networks versus electromagnetic plants, described fuel cycles and ore grades, and compared output numbers in round figures. Becker read aloud production estimates and manufacturing timetables, and Brandt compared railway capacity and energy shortages. Numbers floated like ghosts. Tons per month, 50% shortfall, 2 years behind schedule. Sensory details returned, the room to a workshop, smell of grease, heat, hum of machinery, heard in memory, the tactile weight of a factory ledger. The analysis made clear that German science had been brilliant in isolated laboratories, but lacking the industrial envelope that turned knowledge into deliverable weaponry. A metaphor ran through the talk like a steady drum. Germany had brilliant engines, but no highways to move them fast enough. At the center of the recording, a single line from Brandt stopped conversation and rewrote consequences. He said quietly, "They built what we feared when we were busy proving we could not." Silence fell like a curtain. Pens stilled, coffee cooled, and breath became audible. The sentence drew a new map of responsibility, a strategic pivot from technical failure to political choice. For a long minute, no one spoke. Then Vogel broke the silence with a soft, "It was not only about science. It was about who decided to use factories for prestige and who chose denial." That phrase reframed the event, and it is the moment historians later pointed to as a turning point in understanding why one state converted research into a decisive instrument, while another did not. If you felt surprised or unsettled by these moments, you are not alone. Pause and tell us your first reaction in the comments, then choose one of 3 short options so others can follow your thinking. Did you doubt the report initially? Did you accept it immediately? Or do you have an alternative theory explaining how the weapon was built? Share your answer in the first line, and then add a sentence explaining why. This helps others read the conversation and helps us pick which lines of inquiry to pursue next. Your comments guide the next episode, and we read them carefully. We rely on informed discussion to choose which archives to open next and which experts to bring in. Your voice matters to this investigation and to the larger question of how societies decide what counts as necessary investment and what is deferred. There is power in collective curiosity, so tell us now, and then stay with us as we return to the room to hear the remainder of the recording and to analyze the factory numbers, the transport bottlenecks, and the political choices that turned potential into defeat. In the final arc, the commanders outlined consequences and responsibility. They mapped missed opportunities and compared industrial scales, energy consumption, ore refinement, and railway capacity. They named people and decisions, workers and ministers, and planners. Schultz read a list of factory closures. Neumann noted lost shifts. Adler pointed to policy memos. Bergstrom described the human cost in reassigned nurses. The scene threaded technical explanation with personal accountability, and it became clear that the weapon was not only a technical feat, but a product of national scale and will.
The revelation altered how events were interpreted. Leadership had prioritized some projects and dismissed others, and the outcome was a strategic gap too wide to bridge. Years later, the recording and the documents it referenced shaped an epilogue about responsibility. The men who had argued over numbers faced investigations that traced choices to ministries, to markets, to pre-war decisions. The lesson was not merely that one side had an edge in science. It was that converting science into decisive power requires logistics, funding, and political courage. It is a reminder that technology alone does not make destiny. People make choices, and those choices have consequences. If this story made you think about how societies
distribute resources and who gets to decide, tell us in the comments. And consider following our channel for more investigations that bring documents, voices, and evidence to light. This is a record of a room, a recording, and a decision that changed history. And it shows how responsibility and resource shape the fate of nations.